Good evening, and welcome to the council meeting of February 5th. And council, I'm just looking for a disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof for this evening's agenda. Seeing none. We're on to public meetings. Our first is an informal public meeting. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 10A, official plan amendment number 49 and zoning bylaw amendment Z2313 for 446 Albert Incorporated, 446 Albert Street. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future meeting. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. There is either a book at the back of the room that will serve as the registry, or there's a piece of paper, so whichever is at the back of the room, interested parties are encouraged to sign their name to receive information as this application moves forward through the process. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaws, should sign that piece of paper or registry located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there's more than one registry, which there isn't this evening, please make sure you're signing the appropriate one. The planner, Amanda Wazinski, will now provide a brief overview of the application. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong.
All right, so thank you, Chair Freeman and members of council. Staff are here tonight for an informal public meeting in regards to an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application received for the lands municipally known as 446 Albert Street, received from the Planning Partnership on behalf of 446 Albert, Inc. The subject lands are located within Ward 6 and are at the intersection of Hazel Street and Albert Street. The subject property, being a brownfield site, has an area of approximately 4.72 hectares or 11.6 acres. The applicant is proposing to redevelop the subject property with a total of 13 towers on 6 shared podiums. The applicant is proposing a total of 2,833 units with 3,138 bedrooms, which equates to a density of 780 bedrooms per hectare. I do note the applicant is proposing to include a total of 97 bedrooms, or 3% of the total density, as affordable housing. The total number of units has not been determined as of yet for the affordable housing proportion. And then in regards to parking, it will be provided by way of structured parkings into the podiums up to level 5, and one level of underground parking for buildings 3, 4, and 5. And then this image here is a conceptual plan that demonstrates the location and height of each tower and podium in relation to the proposed roof and landscaping. The buildings along Albert Street are proposed to have a range of heights between 19 and 22 stories. Internal to the site is a range of 17 to 21 stories. And along Hazel Street, a range in heights of 9 to 30 stories. And along the east property line, 9 to 14 stories. The roof is proposed to be a public street, and there is a public park internal to the site and adjacent to the landmark building of 30 stories, also along Hazel Street. And then this image here illustrates the location of retail, lobby, and townhouse-style units. The majority of retail is fronting along Albert Street and Hazel, with the townhouses along the Woonarf Street. And then in regards to the official plan, the subject lands are designated employment on Schedule A and business employment on Schedule A2, and are located within a major transit station hub, that being the Research and Technology Station area. The applicant is proposing to designate the lands as mixed-use high-density residential to facilitate the development, in addition to amending existing site-specific provision 59. I do note the region of Waterloo performed a municipal comprehensive review and accepted a conversion request for this property through Regional Official Plan Amendment number 6. And then in regards to the official plan amendment, the applicant is proposing to redesignate the subject lands from business employment to mixed-use high-density residential, and to introduce new site-specific provisions tailored to the proposed development. These provisions include a maximum building height of 30 stories for one building along Hazel Street, increase the maximum density from 750 hectares to 780, require a minimum affordable and bedroom unit mix, require minimum non-residential floor area, additional permitted uses, built form, and enhanced landscaping. And then in regards to the zoning bylaw, currently the subject lands are zoned as business employment with a height of 40 meters, whereas the applicant is proposing to rezone to station area mixed-use neighborhood commercial A, with various site-specific provisions tailored to the development. And then specifically, the applicant is proposing to permit additional primary uses, these being multi-unit residential, university and college, and light employment. They are also proposing reduced street line setbacks along the Woonarf and increased setbacks from Hazel Street for lots number 4 and number 5. They're also proposing minimum and maximum floor areas for non-residential uses. Furthermore, the applicant is proposing a maximum number of bedrooms for each lot with a total density of 780 bedrooms per hectare for the entire property and minimum landscaped area for each lot. In regards to building massing, a number of site-specific provisions are proposed to facilitate the development. These include setbacks, building height, podium height, horizontal tower dimensions, tower footprint, and parking location. The applicant is also proposing a residential parking reduction from 1 spot per unit, including visitor, to an overall parking rate of 0.4 spaces per unit, including visitor. The applicant is proposing to be compliant with parking for non-residential uses. They are also proposing site-specific provisions related to stacked bicycle parking. And then in terms of the submission materials, the applicant has submitted a number of studies and reports which are currently being reviewed by staff and various commenting agencies. Studies include a shadow study, traffic impact study, land use compatibility, and all in addition to a wind study. And then in terms of staff's review, we're currently reviewing the submitted materials, public comments, and comments received from agencies. I also note the applicant hosted a voluntary public open house on December 13th. Staff have also had working meetings with the applicant to provide further clarification throughout our review. And for next steps, staff will continue the review of the application, continue working meetings when required, and will return to council with the final recommendation for the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. And then through the submission process, the applicant has provided a number of renderings that further illustrate their proposal. For reference, I've included the location map again. So this is the north facade standing on Hazel Street. The building on the left is lot number 4 and is proposed to be 9 stories. The middle building is lot number 5 and is their landmark building, which is proposed to be 30 stories in height. And the building on the right is lot number 6 and is proposed to be 21 stories in height. This image is the west facade along Albert Street. Starting from the left, buildings 6.1 and 6.2 are on a shared podium and have heights of 21 and 22 stories respectively. The middle 2 towers are on lot number 1 and share a podium with 4 buildings total and have proposed heights of 21 and 20 stories. The last building is on lot number 2 and is proposed to have a shared podium with 1 other tower and is proposed to have a height of 19 stories. This elevation is from the Woonarf Street and facing east towards the Sugarbush neighborhood on Hazel Street. Starting at the left, buildings 4.1 is a standalone residential building and is proposed to have a height of 9 stories. Buildings 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3 are on a shared podium and are proposed to be standalone residential and have heights of 8, 11, and 14 stories respectively. And then similarly, this elevation is from the Woonarf Street and is facing west. Starting from the left, building 2.2 is on a shared podium with 1 other tower and is proposed to be 21 stories. The middle buildings are on a shared podium with 4 towers total and have heights of 21 and 17. The final building is the landmark building again, which is on lot number 5 and is along Hazel Street. This building is proposed to be 30 stories tall with parking in the podium. And then this image is a conceptual landscape plan showing the tower placement in relation to the Woonarf and the proposed landscaping. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have. I know that was a lot of information provided. Thank you.
council. Just looking for questions.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Amanda. I'm wondering if you can tell me about the shadow study. Is that complete, or is there more to come on that?
So thank you through the chair. So staff are currently reviewing the shadow study to determine if it is complete or if additional information is required. One of the things that we do look at in relation to many things for a shadow study is to make sure that residential yards have a minimum of 3 continuous hours of sunlight during those specific test dates. So we are currently reviewing the shadow study as of right now.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, just to clarify, 3 consecutive hours per day, or within that time frame, like the 10 a.m. to 6 p.m.?
Through the chair, from what I understand, it's my understanding that it's 3 consecutive hours of the day.
Did you have more? Okay, for the applicant. Council, other questions for Amanda? I had some questions.
Sure.
With regard to some of the studies of supporting documentation, will those undergo peer review, or how are staff managing those? So like the noise impact study, for example, and the land use compatibility assessment, for example?
Through the chair, so specifically the noise and the land use compatibility studies are reviewed by the region. They typically take the lead on those studies. I, as a staff member, do review them as well, but the region does have the area of expertise and specific to those 2 studies.
And I'm trying to remember, the railway is not very far away, so was there also a vibration study done as well?
Through the chair, I do not see the vibration study listed on my list of studies there, but I will get back to and confirm that for you.
And are the renderings ready for the shadow studies as well? Are those in this document?
Through the chair, so the shadows for the renderings for the shadow study are actually in the architectural set, so they are already posted on the Engage website and are available for review.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, I'm making notes, but I'm also supposed to be running the meeting, so, yeah, Councillor Bodley, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Amanda. Thank you, through you, Chair Freeman. Can you comment on the transportation studies that are going to be conducted here, and what they're sort of looking at, particularly within the context of some of the broader development that's going around the maybe areas surrounding this? I'm thinking particularly at King and Weber and whatnot, and how how traffic is going to be facilitated, particularly through the neighborhoods that are there.
Yeah, so through the chair, great question. So they did submit a traffic impact study, and it is currently being reviewed. They did have an agreed upon terms of reference that kind of scoped out the area of the study. I do note that the traffic engineer is actually here tonight, and he'll probably be able to provide a lot more detailed information on that for you. If that's sufficient, okay.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we're going to go on to our delegation. So our first delegation is Brandon Simon, who's an associate with the Planning Partnership. Brandon, you have 10 minutes.
Good evening, members of council, city staff, members of the public. If I might ask if council would indulge me with 5 additional minutes. It's a very complex, large application, and I probably won't need 5 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 additional minutes just to provide a fulsome overview of exactly what's proposed and what went into it.
I'll do my best, but we're not typically okay with that.
Understood. I'll do my best to get through this as quickly as possible. Appreciate your consideration. As Councillor Freeman mentioned, I'm an associate with the Planning Partnership. We're the land use planning, urban design, and landscape architecture consultants, and I'm very excited to present to you this exciting new division that we've proposed for the site. I'll start off with a bit of contextual analysis. The site's located, well, firstly, you'll note that it's a very large site, just under 5 hectares in size. Quite unusual for a redevelopment site, especially within a major transit station area or MTSA. So that gives a very unique opportunity for some comprehensive master planning, not just on the large site itself, but also with the adjacent properties that might also redevelop at some point in the future. The site's also very close to the University of Waterloo, as well as the David Johnson Research and Technology Business Park. So very unique range of different districts and neighborhoods and destinations that bring with them some different mixes of uses and amenities in the area surrounding the site. From the onset, we've really looked to establish kind of a high-level vision of what we're looking to do here based on the large site and the MTSA location. And that's first and foremost to establish a new master planned complete community and focus on 5 key objectives, including providing for a sizable supply of very much needed residential housing, and that's a mix of different unit types as well as affordable housing, to really provide some enhanced streetscape and public realm design to create a pedestrian-friendly environment and to invite people into the site for true integration and connectivity to the surrounding area. Look at site layout thoughtfully with a strong urban design perspective and integrate very creative and interesting architectural design to create some visual interest and make this a destination. Really integrate different uses, active transportation, and different services to create a fully functional, really well thought out development community, and also to provide for not just housing, but also commercial amenities, services, and employment opportunities, and overall to completely transform, rejuvenate, reutilize what is a very large development site with a lot of potential, but which has some contamination issues and other conditions that present some unique opportunities and challenges from a development perspective. In terms of the site history, in 1962, Clemmer Industries established a tank manufacturing plant on the site, and that obviously came with it fulfilled some very important industrial functions, created some employment, but it also left with it some unique site conditions that make it very uninviting in its present form. There's a barbed wire fence around the perimeter of the site. The site's occupied by a mix of industrial buildings as well as large paved areas and graveled areas that were used in the past for storage as well as transportation, parking, and whatnot. So a very uninviting condition at present. And there's also some subsurface soil and groundwater contamination. The applicant's been very proactive. They've actually already received their record of site condition from the province, which provides direction and actually approves redevelopment subject to rehabilitating the site, and that process has already actually begun with an application to demolish some of the existing buildings to allow for that removal of contaminated soils to occur. So that process is already underway. Being within an MTSA, it's no surprise that the site is very well supported by transportation, or public transit and active transportation. Is illustrated on this figure. It's about a 5-minute walk from the Ion LRT station, 10-minute walk to different I-Express BRT routes, and there are also some more proximate local bus routes. In addition, very robust and expanding active transportation network in the city. That includes Albert Street, where physically separated bicycle lanes were recently constructed, and that runs right past the subject site as shown in the image on the bottom left there. So really well supported by transit and active transportation, a great opportunity to leverage and support those services and provide for a real forward-thinking development here. Obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention or acknowledge the direction from the provincial and regional governments to the city when it comes to growth management and the requirement to create new housing opportunities. There's obviously very substantial population growth forecast over the next 25 to 30 years. And the city's made a very meaningful, ambitious pledge to the province when it comes to creating new housing opportunities in the next 10 years. The region has also identified a dramatic need for new affordable housing in the region, 30,000 units over the next 30 years. And one of the tools that's being investigated to get there is inclusionary zoning within MTSAs, and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. So based on these different challenges, opportunities, contextual characteristics, direction from the province and the region, we've come up with a new exciting vision for a transit-oriented community on the subject site. This is a bird's eye view of what the proposed development would look like. Mix of different built forms and building compositions, as Amanda mentioned, ranging in height from 8 up to 30 stories. So a good mix of different building heights and built forms located along that central Wooner Street and well connected by different pedestrian connections and integrated into an overall landscaped open space network. I won't highlight these too much more because Amanda's already done a great job overviewing what the development proposal is, but I'll focus again on the affordable housing, 97 bedrooms, 3% of the total residential component, which is very meaningful, especially for a development of this size, and that's made possible by the modest increase in density to 780 bedrooms per hectare compared to 750, which is what's typically been permitted for high-density sites in the city in the recent past. On the non-residential front, I'll highlight this because we've really wanted to create a truly mixed-use development here, not just, you know, a token commercial unit on the ground floor. There's a lot of commercial space on the ground floor to support stores, restaurants, cafes, you name it. But above that, there's also second floor space in the buildings facing Albert Street, which will support employment space. So that's potentially office if there's demand for it, institutional uses. City staff through pre-consultation recommended as well light industrial uses, potentially uses that can be supported by or support small business or entrepreneurs affiliated with the university as an example. So we're really trying to design very flexible space here to create some very meaningful employment. On the parking front, I'll just reiterate as well that Andrew from Paradigm Transportation Solutions is in attendance, and there are a few transportation slides at the end, so if you do have any questions, he can run through a bit of a summary and provide some more detailed response to any questions you have on transportation or parking. The last point I'll make from this slide is that the overall landscaped open space is proposed at just or a little over 1 hectare, so that's over a quarter of the site, and that's entirely proposed to be publicly accessible. Even lands that would be privately owned would be proposed to be publicly accessible through easement agreement with the city, so that this is a truly public, open, urban area, inviting people in from the surrounding streets and areas and really trying to create a unique urban environment within this MTSA. From a site structure perspective, the central Woonerf is kind of the central spine of the site, bisecting the site and providing for potential expansion with the neighboring site to the south if it redevelops in the future. But beyond that, we're looking at multiple different pedestrian connections to the surrounding streets, as well as the potential for a future connection to the east as well, if a connection can be provided there in the future in work with the city. And these support truly an integrated, well-connected, and a really permeable urban environment, trying to support public transit and active transportation first and foremost. In terms of the different components that make up the landscaped open space system, the central gathering space located on the north side of the Woonerf is kind of the principal focus. It's a large space where you'll have patio space, urban plaza space, some green space, as well as potentially a stormwater collection and infiltration facility, trying to get some environmental functionality into the space as well. And we've purposefully set back building 4.1 further from the street to try to create a larger avenue into the site from the street and really bring people into that space. Additionally, along Albert Street and Hazel Street, you have more urban promenade space, potentially some spill-out opportunities for patios and things like that for the ground floor commercial uses. And then to the rear of the mid-rise buildings, you see a meandering path that provides more of a passive amenity. And then, of course, there are some landscape facilities along the Woonerf, which is really designed to be a shared space between vehicles and pedestrians, which naturally encourages slower driving speeds, safer, more interactive environment for all of the users of that street. The other thing I'll quickly note is that we've purposefully designed or tried to really think about wind and sun conditions when locating that central gathering space, really trying to ensure that there's adequate sunlight on that in kind of the prime areas of the day to encourage usage, and also looked at transitioning these built forms and building heights to reduce shadow impacts on the Sugar Bush Park to the north and the surrounding residential areas to the east. We're confident that the shadow study fully addresses the city's guidelines, and we'll obviously be awaiting some comments from city staff as to if they have any questions with the shadow study. The next few slides just highlight a few of the renderings that Amanda mentioned have been prepared, and we wanted to do this to really show three-dimensionally what this is going to look like, because that's how it's going to be perceived. So the top two are those three bird's eye views that show the mix of building heights and built forms. Bottom left is that central landscaped open space showing the different components that'll make up that active landscaped area. And then the bottom right is that proposed Woonerf with the intermixing of the pedestrian and vehicular traffic, creating that traffic calmed urban environment. I'll quickly skip over to the affordable housing and just one more slide after this. I mentioned earlier 3% of the total residential space is proposed as affordable housing. The city is currently investigating the use of inclusionary zoning in MTSAs. For this MTSA, the proposed requirement, although it's not approved or enforced yet, would be 1% initially, potentially growing to 3% by 2031. So what the applicant's looking to do here is to voluntarily and proactively provide this affordable housing supply before inclusionary zoning is actually a requirement, and to implement it at a rate that is going to be what the long-term future requirement would be for this MTSA. So I think it's a very meaningful, proactive step from the applicant, and the creation of 97 affordable bedrooms, I think, is a very, very meaningful supply, and we look forward to working to implement that with the city, region, or potentially some other partners. Last slide in terms of the information is just the kind of where we are at in the process. As Amanda mentioned, we hosted, with the assistance of staff and attended by Councillor Rowe as well, an introductory open house in December, very well attended, some very good initial feedback and questions related to phasing, timing, what did the transportation analysis look at and what did it conclude, what are the different uses that you're looking to integrate here, will the landscaped open space be publicly accessible. So we very much look forward to building on that feedback, getting some additional feedback from yourselves as well as members of the public tonight, technical comments from the city and region in short order so we can get an application submission in that addresses those comments and looks to further improve this application in advance of a formal public meeting before you, hopefully in the near future. So that would conclude my presentation. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have, and as I mentioned, Andrew's also here if you'd like to hear a bit about transportation.
Great, thank you, Brandon. All right, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. I do have a few questions, if you'll bear with me. The first is about the transportation impact study. So if I'm reading it correctly and looking at the scope of the study, it incorporates Albert and Hazel, the corner rather of Behringer down to Hazel across Albert. But it doesn't actually, from what I'm seeing, go around down Hazel to Weber and incorporate Blythewood and Milford and Tamarack. Am I reading that correctly?
Why don't I invite Andrew up because he's the expert. He actually authored that report.
Thank you.
And there's a few summary slides here that you can speak to, Andrew.
Good evening, Council, City staff, members of the general public. My name is Andrew Steinsky. I'm with Paradigm Transportation Solutions Limited. As Brandon mentioned, we completed the transportation impact study for this application. Our scope of work, to the question, was confirmed with city and region staff during our internal pre-study consultation. We also followed published guidelines by the region of Waterloo for traffic impact studies. We completed traffic counts in September 2023 at the two intersections, which were Albert Street and Hazel and Behringer, and Albert and Phillip. And we had estimated sort of a trip generation at the site of about 530 trips in what we call the morning peak hour. That's sort of the heaviest hour, and 703 trips in the PM peak hour. I can continue through, or I can take questions if there is a preference.
Thank you. I think what I was seeing, and as this is my ward, and the concerns that I'm having or hearing from the residents, is the cut-through traffic. And so I'm just curious about the incorporation of the broader transportation network.
Sure.
In the study from Weber along Blythewood, because there's cut-through that happens now, so I can't anticipate even what it would be. So I don't know if you can address that.
No, so through the chair, yeah. So our intention was sort of the micro of this site. What we expect kind of the significant areas to be where we'll see that level of traffic, which would be at the two signals. This one to the south is where the main property connection, the Woonerf, will be constructed. Our study area did not extend beyond Hazel and around the horizontal curve. And so that's, to answer the question, it did not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Then can I turn to staff, Amanda? Is it possible to expand the transportation impact study terms of reference to ensure a comprehensive evaluation is undertaken to incorporate this area, including in relation to the neighborhood to the east of the site and incorporating forecasted traffic from development applications in the broader area. Just, as I was saying, this is a concern now, so I'm just feel like it's important to look at.
So thank you through the chair. That is definitely something staff can look at through our review, and if we deem it appropriate to expand the study area, we can provide that through the comments on this submission.
That would be great, thank you. So this is a part B to that question. It's also a high pedestrian student area, Milford having Winston Churchill Public School. So with incorporating the broader review, can we look at possibly reaching out to the school board and connecting with them? Because there are bus stop areas on Hazel and at Albert and Behringer, and also just so many kids walking to school. So my concern is with the increase population, sort of what the impact that would be.
So thank you through the chair. So whenever we receive an application, whether it be an official plan or like a zoning bylaw amendment, the school boards, both the public and the Catholic board, are circulated on applications. So they do have the opportunity to review it and provide comments. For this one, I'm still awaiting comments from the public school in relation to the school site. This application would need to proceed through what we call site plan control. And through the site plan control process, potentially, we could require what we call a school bus loading plan. So it would locate the locations where those students looking to take a school bus or like where the pathways could go. So it's through the, right now we're at a very high level process, but through the micro, which would be the site plan control, we can evaluate all that as well. But the school board is circulated on these applications.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Okay, my second question, if that's okay with everyone, is about the landmark building and the location of it at that particular side on Hazel Street.
In terms of why we decided to
Sorry.
locate there?
Yes,
why
I
we-
am
yeah.
wondering, I see you have like the built form, you have various heights, et cetera, and I'm just curious as to the location of that one in conjunction to the low-rise residential area, which is close by.
For sure. No, it's a great question. In terms of, I'll kind of start with the second part of your question, maybe kind of loop back. So the big thing we looked at here from a built form perspective was we definitely acknowledge there's a need for transition moving towards the east. Already on the west side of Hazel Street, you see predominantly a mix of kind of low-rise apartment buildings that naturally provide a bit of a transition down to the single attached townhouses, et cetera, that are further east. But we wanted to add to that, extend that transition into the site and really get that kind of really visible, easily identifiable transition there. And so the big focus for us was that more mid-rise built form on the eastern third of the site that then transitions down into those low-rise apartments along Hazel Street. In terms of the location of the landmark building, it fulfills a number of important functions. It's adjacent to, but it won't cast shadow onto that central landscape open space figure. That's kind of the draw, the big focus from a landscape perspective. We really want to concentrate population and activity around that area because we think it'll be more successful if there are more people using it. That's really the point of this publicly accessible integrated network is integration and interaction. So it's next to that. It's at the kind of the termination of the WUNRF, so it also has some, I think, interesting visual interest elements to it, really kind of highlighting that slightly more landmark, and I'll say slightly, 25 stories is what was historically established as kind of the maximum height generally in high-density sites. So we're looking at just 5 additional stories for this building here. So it's located adjacent to that landscaped open space feature at the termination of that WUNRF, also still in proximity to that Albert Street and Hazel Street intersection. It's also responding to site conditions related to geotechnical soil bearing capacities and whatnot, and that's an ideal location for a taller building element. But again, informed by kind of those other urban design considerations, we think it's a location that makes sense and really will highlight the slightly taller element is the landmark building in this development proposal.
So I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm wondering, though, if there are opportunities to reduce the built form of that particular one. Just when I look at the shadow study and the impacts on sugarbush woodlands and also on wildwood, if that is something that could be considered.
We're certainly open to considering any of the feedback that we get, and I think Amanda alluded to this, we've had a number of great working meetings already with city staff, as well as obviously the open house and other pre-consultation meetings, and we recognize that this is a very large transformative development project, and that's kind of the name of the game, is getting feedback from yourself and others at meetings like this. So it's certainly something that we can consider. At the same time, the other point I'll just want to reinforce is that we really wanted to get a mix of building heights and built forms here, because I think Waterloo being so proactive in terms of pre-zoning a bunch of different sites throughout the city for high-density development, you see kind of a consistent 25-story height in a lot of cases, because that's what the maximum height is. So we've really tried to get some variety in this case, because we feel that it adds something from a visual interest perspective, and hopefully will serve as a model for how you can do that with some slightly taller and shorter built foam components in different parts of the site. But absolutely, we can take back your comment on the height of that specific building and consider what that means from a broader development perspective.
Thank you. And so Amanda, can I leave that with you then to evaluate the opportunities to mitigate the height impacts? That would be awesome. And my last question is about the amenity space and the impact on Sugarbush. I'm just wondering, how does the current amenity space that you have laid out so far meet the needs of the population on the site? So what I'm wondering is the expectation that people will leave the site and then use Sugarbush for a lot of their amenity needs? Are you hoping that they're going to stay on site?
We're hoping that we provide the opportunity for them to stay on site, to utilize a wide range of different amenities, and for people who don't live in this development to come into the site to utilize those amenities. It's really trying to get interaction here. Obviously, there's no stopping someone from utilizing a great resource like Sugarbush Park. It's unique in an urban environment to have, pedestrian pathways through essentially a forested feature. So there's no doubt that it's a unique environment, and we have a strong arboricultural practice within our company, and they were part of this urban design analysis. And so we're confident that from a shadow perspective that there will not be any detrimental impact to Sugarbush Park. Also, confident that what we've provided for here will diversify the offering of amenity options in the area. So these green spaces on the roofs here are all intended to be rooftop amenity areas for use by residents of this development. So those will provide space for probably pet relief areas, dining areas, barbecue, etc. Landscape, or the central gathering space, as I mentioned, will have some more urban patio space, but also some green features for just kind of lounging. Also, these areas back here with these meandering pathways provide essentially a walking circuit kind of through and around the site. So the idea here is that anyone, not just residents, members of the public, can utilize this site for walking, for active transportation, for more urban public park amenity. But obviously, there's also the opportunity to utilize other public parks in the area, and Sugarbush Park is one of them. So we want to work with Sugarbush Park to really diversify the open space offerings and options for residents in this area and in the broader area.
Thank you. I think then I'm going to turn to staff. Just considering Sugarbush Park and the pressures on that in terms of other proposed developments in the area, I'm wondering, as part of the amenity space analysis, if consideration can be given to the potential for negative impacts on Sugarbush. I'm just thinking of the population size, not just of this development, but of others in the area. And I'm saying that because just in that particular neighborhood, there is also not a lot of other parks. So that's just a concern. So I'm wondering if planning can connect with community services to review the Sugarbush woodlands in light of the broader, larger developments. And then, excuse me, can the amount and type of on-site amenity space proposed be reviewed in context of demand? And I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm just, as I'm looking at it, it looks beautiful. I'm just wondering, is there a ratio, like for a development for green space per X number of people? And I'm sorry, I don't know if, I'm just throwing that out there.
So thank you through the chair. So great questions and great comments. So staff definitely can connect with community services in relation to this development and potential impacts on Sugarbush Park. That is something we already take in consideration. Just like when there is a development, we look at the broader area and kind of say like, what are those impacts? So that's something I haven't connected directly with community services as of yet, but that is something we've already started to take into consideration. And then in terms of amenity space, so we do have what's called a parkland control bylaw, which require developments to provide either cash in lieu or like the physical space. So in this instance, they are proposing physical space, so we would make sure that they are meeting the parkland control bylaw. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the actual ratio is for a dense development of this type, but we would make sure that they are in conformity with it, with the bylaw.
If I may, maybe Councillor Rowe, just because I was doing some parkland research on another project just coincidentally the other day. So in the province's infinite wisdom, one of the recent changes they made through Bill 23 was to establish these parkland caps, if you will, based on the size of the site. So for sites that are 5 hectares or less, which this would be the maximum cap equates to 10% of the land area. So in this case, we're proposing about a quarter of the site is landscaped open space, and that's not an apples to apples comparison because this is proposed, generally speaking, is privately owned but publicly accessible space. So the idea, I think kind of the emerging idea in the Greater Golden Horseshoe is that there should be a mix of, traditional public parkland, your soccer fields, your baseball parks and whatnot that are kind of outright public owned, and other more kind of urban open space solutions, kind of like POPs, which would be what's proposed here, publicly owned, privately owned, publicly accessible spaces, as well as some other things, strata parks and things like that. And that maybe there's also recognition, it might not be 100% kind of one-for-one recognition for these other spaces, but at least partial recognition that those are also should count as parkland contributions. And that's another thing that Bill 23 requires is consideration of that. And the benefit of that is that it potentially allows the city to get more physical space than would otherwise be required, as is proposed here, while also allowing for maintenance to be essentially the owner or the result or to be carried out by the ownership of the development project. So we obviously looked forward to getting some comments from city staff on implementation and understand they're probably reviewing their parkland bylaw right now like a lot of other municipalities.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering if staff has any further comments on that.
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor Rowe. With respect to the legislation, there are a number of factors that are under review by the province, but those provisions are not in effect. So certainly staff will review the application with respect to the needs for both active recreation space and passive recreation space, and try and understand specifically what the appropriate ratio would be for this development in terms of those spaces to meet the recreational, social, and the health of the residents of this particular development and the community as a whole. So it's an item we can look at in more detail as the application comes forward, but currently we don't have a particular ratio specific to the city. It's something that the park land strategy that has come to council has started that work, but we don't have a specific ratio at this point in time. We'll certainly review though through the process.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Councillor Bonnelly.
Thank you through your chair for you, and my apologies, Councillor Rowe, for jumping the gun on the transportation question that you asked. Sorry about that. I have a question about the potential contamination of the site that you sort of alluded to, and I'm wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit more to that, and also whether you are far along in the process to know whether or not you are planning to advance any sort of tax increment grant related to the contamination of the site and the cleanup?
Yep, great question. So I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to environmental engineering, but the site has both soil and groundwater contamination in certain locations. As part, or in recognition of that, the applicant advanced very early on environmental site assessment work to try to localize where those areas of contamination are and figure out required remediation efforts. And that included very long and extensive submission to the Ministry of the Environment, who kind of oversees environmental contamination, and in this case has issued a record of site condition, which allows for the change in use from industrial to residential or other similar sensitive land uses, subject to another document which specifies rehabilitation work that needs to take place. That includes some soil removal, as well as things like capping over contaminated areas and potentially other features associated with the groundwater contamination. So that's already very well advanced, and as I said, has been approved by the province. And yes, there has been a submission, a pre-submission to the region under the Brownfield Grant Program. Very large site. It's no surprise that the rehabilitation work is expensive. The grant's a great opportunity to encourage redevelopment of sites like this. So yes, there has been submission, and we're looking to make use of that program, which I understand is winding down in process, or currently winding down. Though I would certainly hope that the city and region look at extending it, because I think it's a great resource for redevelopment sites like this.
That's great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Just a second question, if I may, Councilor Freeman. Through you, this is just maybe sort of a curiosity type question. We don't often get developers who come in and have already hosted like an informal public meeting. So just from your perspective, I'm wondering if you can highlight for us, when you decide to host one of these, what are you hoping to get out of hosting a public information session informally? And do you feel like you got that out of the session that you hosted in December?
Great question again. I understand that the city's actually moving in the direction of requiring initial informal open houses for certain types of applications anyways, and I think it's a necessity in the Bill 109 world, whereby there are these very protracted application timeframes where municipalities have to make decisions on applications. So what that allowed us to do in this case, and I'll also give credit to Councillor Rowe, because we had a bit of an initial pre-consultation meeting about this, and she recommended, this is a community that's very active and interested in what's going on in the community and development projects, so she also recommended that we hold a kind of an introductory meeting in advance of this informal public meeting. And what that allowed us to do in this case is kind of give the public 2 months initial notice as to what's coming on here. Notice isn't the right word, that's kind of a technical term under the Planning Act, but kind of a heads up as to what's coming on and to introduce them into the specifics of what's proposed here. I felt it was very constructive. I didn't get the exact list, the city got the exact list, but I believe probably around 30 or maybe a few more people who attended. Got some great questions and got some insight as to what's really some of the top topics of interest for the community. Traffic obviously being one of them, no surprise there, and something that we're happy to look at further, subject to getting comments from the city and the region on that. Also questions about timing, development staging, and so one of the other things that we're going to look at as part of our resubmission is to talking a bit more about what that means, and that's a difficult question to answer right now given financial concerns, interest rates, markets, general market unknowns, but we'll do the best we can to try to paint a picture of what the timeline for this development would look like. So yes, I thought it was absolutely very useful. It was very well attended, and it's something that I think we'll be looking at doing for other large development projects in the future, and something that might be required by the city moving forward.
Other questions, Council? Councillor Vasek?
Thanks, through you, Chair. I was just curious on the urban design slide. There are these things on the roof.
Where was that
You
slide?
were there, yeah. I think back here.
Oh,
Yeah, what are they? Are they hiding something, or are they a design element?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. So that's, most of the structured parking is shielded by, shielded is a bad word, but I'm gonna use it because I can't think of another one, by other space like residential units or commercial space at grade. This part, that's being used to animate the rear of the parking structure there. So we're looking at some different textural building elements to create some additional visual interest on that part of the building. Understanding that it's difficult we wanted to optimize the space of the open space here, and so providing some additional residential space on the back would actually reduce the size of that open space. So this is trying to come up with a unique design solution to provide some additional animation and interest for the back of the parking, and also optimize the size of that landscaped open space.
Oh, I see. So it's so you can't see where I'm pointing to on my screen. At any time it comes up higher, it's parking along that side of the building, you mean?
Not anytime necessarily. Over here, you'll see there are some residential units that are fronting there, but we've tried to integrate the parking into the podium structures wherever possible, and the result is that there's no surface parking at all in this proposal. It's all incorporated through the underground and structured parking, and so all of the podium spaces include some structured parking, and again, try to locate that a bit set back from Albert Street and Hazel Street so we can get those facing commercial and residential uses there. And also, for the most part, along the Woonerf, so you'll have the parking is kind of concentrated in the middle here, and you'll have that kind of skinned by residential and commercial spaces. And there are a few areas, though, where, again, in order to optimize that landscaped open space, there is some exposed structured parking that we're trying to provide as much visual interest as possible in those locations.
Other questions, Council? Councilor Wright?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm just really curious about how these driveways are going to work on Hazel. The plaza across the street also has 2 driveways. And this is a section of road. I've had the misfortune of sitting on Behringer, waiting for the light to change at Albert during peak traffic hours, and then seeing people gun it through the intersection if they make the light, through that section of Hazel that goes up to the swing around to the right. And you've got bus stops there, and you've got maybe 4 driveways now accessing that little section. So I'm just curious how that's going to work with the traffic volume.
Yeah, maybe I'll invite Andrew back up. And before Andrew gets started, too, one of the other options that were, one of the other considerations that we chatted with staff about, because we actually had a meeting shortly in the new year to kind of go over some questions, initial questions they had on the transportation study. And we brought up one of the comments we heard, at the community open house, which was, what traffic calming options are there for that curve in the road? And so staff kind of walked us through some different approaches that they've used thus far and are considering. So certainly something that's top of mind that we've talked about, or talked with staff about. And Andrew, maybe you want to try to address the driveway question.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Through the chair, when we assigned, as we call it, our traffic estimates to the road network, we assigned them based on the proportion of units per building. So as Brandon was mentioning, that building sort of in the northeast corner is a lower height, there's fewer units. So we're actually projecting less vehicular traffic at the 3 driveway connections onto Hazel. Operationally, our findings did not indicate poor operations or anything of that nature, or the need for what we call auxiliary turn lanes, a left turn lane or a right turn lane at those connections. So
Can you just point out where the 3rd driveway is? I see 2, but I'm not.
So it's 1, 2, and the 3rd.
Ooh, right at the corner. Yikes. Okay. Just from my personal experience, that sounds awful.
Did you have any other questions other than that comment? Okay. Okay. Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and Councillor Wright did ask a couple of my questions, so that's terrific. My question is around the affordable housing, and I appreciate that you've got 97 bedrooms in there. Can you share with us a little bit more about two things? The plan for how those are going to be allocated and the plan for how they will be maintained as affordable housing units?
Yeah, great question. That's kind of, especially the maintenance part is kind of the really important question, I think, as we look to bring a whole bunch of new affordable housing online. So we know that the region is looking to really develop expertise and already has, developed their own affordable housing. So we suspect that we will be looking at some sort of partnership integration program with the region when it comes to figuring out what is the optimal distribution of those bedrooms in terms of unit types, and how are they, operated over the long term. So shorter answer is we're not quite sure yet. What we've done as part of our application, and specifically the official plan amendment application, is to include a specific provision area, which would essentially establish minimum requirement of affordable housing is this, and we're looking to layer some additional details in as we move the process forward in terms of what is affordable defined as, because that's a bit of a moving target. And not only that, but there are also different levels of affordability that are kind of, achievable and warranted in kind of different circumstances. So it's what is the degree of affordability, what is the mix of affordability, what is the length of affordability. So these are all things that we're expecting. We'll get some comments from region any probably day or week now that will speak in part to that. And they might also recommend that there might be some other third parties that would be interested, because this is, I think with inclusionary zoning, and especially with kind of the requirements that are proposed for this area, starting at 1%, growing to 3%, you'll get a lot of smaller contributions of kind of like a couple units or a few units here or there. This is a very meaningful contribution, so the applicant's open to figuring out what the best way to administer that is, and we're looking to some direction from the region, but also open to working with other organizations if that's kind of what would work best from an operations perspective.
I would suggest you consider a fairly broad definition of what affordability is. Your last, it's not just those that need additional support. It's a full gamut of affordability that we're looking at. So I'd be interested in knowing a little bit more about that, and a little bit more about how it's going to be allocated throughout the site. For a whole host of reasons, but it sounds like you've got all of those under consideration, so I'll look forward to hearing more about that when you come back.
Sure, and just one more thought on the kind of the allocation, I guess, question. We've kind of kicked a few ideas around in our head, which are, what is it maybe more efficient to kind of centralize them from an operations perspective? And I think the region said that probably is more efficient from an operations perspective, but it also might not be kind of the ideal just from an allocation perspective. So what we're probably looking at, though, just because obviously operationally it's important to have kind of at least some sort of centralized, easy to administer kind of allocation. So I would imagine, though we're not sure yet, probably be kind of maybe like a couple or so groupings of them kind of distributed throughout the site. Certainly the intention is not to kind of like allocate them all in one area, and that's like the affordable housing building. This is trying to be integrated, not just in terms of uses, but also in terms of those different dwellings. So
it sounds like that the latter will sit a little bit better with the overall theme that you've got of full integration throughout the site. So I look forward to how those deliberations and discussions carry out. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you. Councillor Roach.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Freeman. Actually, a lot of my questions were just answered. Thank you, Councillor Hanmer, for asking. I'm the councillor for Ward 3, which borders right on that area too. And it's a really unique neighborhood. I mean, there's some great, beautiful, established homes just north, on the Wildwood, Blythewood area. And there's some, in the same distance away, probably 100, 200 meters away on the other side, there's some, it's a lot of new Canadians, and it's a really diverse communities. And Waterloo needs housing, Waterloo needs affordable housing, and Waterloo families need affordable housing. So, I commend the developer for offering 97 bedrooms as deemed affordable. And just as you had mentioned, how do we define affordable? And my question was, were any of the 3-bedroom units that families can live in, will any of those be included in affordable bedrooms?
Yeah, and the reason why we included kind of 97 bedrooms is kind of the metric in this presentation is because we're not sure what the allocation will be. It could include mix of 1, 2, or 3-bedroom units, and I, to your question, would imagine that those are particularly needed in terms of the need for affordable housing. So I imagine through those discussions, it will probably be some mix of all 3 of those different unit types. What we're really trying to figure out, based on the research that the region and or the city has done, is what is the most needed in this city, in this location, and really trying to tick as many boxes as possible. So we haven't landed on it, but the applicant's open to whatever distribution makes the most sense.
Thank you.
Mayor McCabe.
Thank you, excuse me, thank you, Chair Freeman, through you to the applicant. Just a couple of questions. Thanks to my council colleagues for all the great questions you've already asked. I was just wondering if you could share some information about the heating and cooling, like the energy sources that you're thinking of using for this, because I mean, I'm particularly interested in that, but also in addition to that, if you could comment on wind and what that might do given the configuration of and the heights of the various heights of these buildings. So 2 different questions, but if you could comment on those, thank you.
Absolutely. So firstly on the heating cooling question. So initially the applicant was very eager to look at geothermal heating cooling here. Very large site, makes a good opportunity for use of that. Initially the region said, we don't think this is a good site for it given, the underground contamination. We have a very detailed or very experienced hydrogeological consultant on board who said, we think we can technically address that through a number of different approaches. Had a follow-up meeting with the region, and they basically said, we really appreciate the diligence that you're showing in this and the willingness to do this, but out of an abundance of caution, whether it comes to groundwater, when it comes to drinking water, they do not want to consider geothermal heating and cooling here. So unfortunately, that option came off the table for this location. But the applicant is committed to sustainability, so they're exploring other options to integrate different sustainable technologies, and obviously at the simplest level, that's efficient fixtures and things like that, but that's pretty much a standard, I would imagine, in the industry right now. So as part of this application, one of the newer studies that the city required is what's called an energy strategy, which looks at basically what are the opportunities to incorporate different technologies to enhance sustainability. And it's kind of a smart cutting-edge study because it's basically saying, this isn't an afterthought. You need to think of this up front in the process, and you need to integrate that into your building design. So that identified some different options that we're looking at, and I suspect as part of our resubmission, we'll be providing some additional details as to what's proposed. Obviously, the applicant needs to do some additional due diligence on their own end in terms of what's feasible here, what that means from a construction cost perspective, from an operations and mechanical perspective. So although this is an early application, early stages application, we're really trying to take those potential opportunities to heart. So I think we'll be reporting back on some more details on that with the next submission. And with regards to your second question, the wind, yes. As part of the application, we had a pedestrian level wind study undertaken, and similar to the energy strategy, we worked with the wind consultant kind of earlier on in the visioning concept planning process, because there are a few different techniques you can utilize and integrate into the built form that really help to regulate and mitigate wind impacts. And one of those is kind of the podium tower typology, where you get those building step backs integrated into the built form that disrupt downrush of the wind. The other interesting thing that we're looking at doing here, and this is part of the kind of those different provisions that are proposed to be amended, is we're looking to integrate some additional kind of stepping going up some of the buildings to create some additional wind mitigation. Also looking at canopies and things like that at strategic entrances. By and large, the wind study found that the wind conditions are good and acceptable. There are a few areas where we're looking at some additional mitigation, but the really important one is this, I think, the central landscape space. We, in the urban designing process, looked at kind of the prevailing wind patterns and actually how we can use buildings to shield that space from some of those prevailing winds. And the wind study found that the conditions in that are very favorable for what we're looking to do there, which is more of a passive landscaped open space area. So the city's still going to be reviewing that wind study like the other studies and may have some questions. And as we move on to the future application site plan in particular, that's where we'll also implement some additional mitigation measures such as those canopies like I mentioned.
Just one follow-up. Thank you for that information. I'm just also curious about, you had mentioned some employment spaces here. Could you just explain what what the applicant's proposing for employment? Thank you. Uses?
Yep, sure. So kind of a wide range. We're really trying to be flexible because like many things these days, I think the office and the commercial market is very, it's hard to gauge as to what exactly is in demand now and what will be in demand 2, 3, 5 years from now. So it's a mix of different things. At the ground floor, permitting a wide range of commercial uses, so a retail store, cafe, restaurants, personal services, financial services, et cetera. In addition, there's some second floor space within these buildings fronting onto Albert Street, which will provide for what I'll call more employment geared uses. So that'll be potentially office if there is demand for it, institutional if there's demand, if the universities, as an example, need some additional space off campus for lectures or whatever. And the other thing that staff suggested to us in the pre-consultation meeting was kind of light industrial. And so don't think of like a warehouse or a manufacturing plant, but kind of like an industrial condo that, for example, a professor who works at a university who has a side business making robots might utilize that space because there might be a shortage of that space on the campus. So because of that, we've tried to integrate some additional loading space capabilities, understanding that there might be some additional requirements for that with that use. So we're really trying to be flexible because I think it's anyone's guess as to what's actually going to be in demand in the future, but we think we've done a pretty good job integrating that into this and that it will provide for some reasonable or some meaningful employment generation in addition to this new housing.
Any other questions, council? I have some. So back to traffic. Sorry, Andrew, put you back in the hot seat. In the transportation impact study, I noticed that you're forecasting just a change in the peak hour on Hazel of 23 vehicles headed westbound and 8 vehicles headed eastbound. But that doesn't account for AADTs. Can we get a better feel of what's going on here in terms of total daily volumes of traffic? I recognize this is your peak hours at those intersections and you're looking at level of service, but more broadly, if you're someone who lives in the neighborhood, they want to know how many more vehicles could potentially be going past their street, not just what's the turning movement at a peak hour. The forecasted AADT in the noise and vibration, traffic noise and vibration, is just over, I think it's 8,800 and some on AADTs. But I'd really like it if we get a better sense of what those daily traffic volumes are looking like more broadly within a larger study area. So between Weber and Columbia and beyond Behringer, like Weber to Columbia and then Weber to, I don't know, beyond Behringer. Because I think that when people are thinking about cut-through traffic, they're not just looking at the peak hours.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if we can figure out how to better understand that piece, it would be worthwhile. The other question that I had was, I noticed in the noise and vibration report, and I know that Jillian's not here because I don't see her, that there was some mention of potential class 4, and I don't know, is that for all the buildings, or is it just for the buildings that are near the automotive repair center?
Right, so the noise study identified that there's an auto repair center to the south. It is an existing, and you're more of an expert than I am, Councillor Freeman, but I'll try my best here. I believe an ESER for the use of different facilities. And what the noise study basically found is that if we assume that or based on what they've observed, if the doors are open while they're doing their work, there's some added noise that impacts just the southern buildings on the site. And they actually recommended, before consideration of the Class 4, meeting with and working with the neighbor to try to figure out if we can figure out some improvements that could be made to the facilities or their operations to avoid the need to do that and to maintain, without impacting their ability to do what they do, because they are fully permitted and approved for what they're doing. So the applicant has reached out to the neighbor and is trying to set up meeting or meetings to kind of discuss some opportunities for that. But it is just the southern two buildings, and I believe just the south facades of those buildings that are detrimentally impacted based on kind of current regulations and requirements. So if a Class 4 was necessary, I would suspect it would be, or could be anyways, very geographically restricted to that part of the site.
Yeah, I just think asking for a Class 4 is kind of a big ask personally, so, you know, looking at some other mitigation like enclosed buffer balconies or something wherever you have the highest impacts, I think would be preferred to the city having precedent for setting a Class 4 in the middle of a residential neighborhood.
For sure, and I think even more so, it seems like the simplest route would be the at-source mitigation if we're able to figure out some sort of solution with the neighboring owner. I think that's kind of dollar for dollar the most economical way to do it. So the applicant has experience with that kind of those kinds of negotiations in other sites in the past. So I'm confident they'll be able to figure something out that can keep everyone happy. Failing that, we can also look at the at-receptor mitigation like you suggested. So that's really the only area that was kind of raised by those studies. And as I mentioned, the applicant's trying to set up meetings with the neighbor to discuss that further.
And the warning clause was for the whole site, not just those few buildings?
Don't remember off the top of my head which warning clauses are kind of for the whole site of those two buildings, but fairly typical, I think, these days for kind of the general warning clauses for sites like this. So, but not 100% sure off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks. I still had, sorry, being a bit scattered in my questions and going back to traffic. So yeah, I see that in the noise impact study, they're forecasting 2033 future traffic, annual daily traffic of AADT, what is that,
That would be-
average?
That's your average annual daily traffic.
Okay, right.
volume.
So they're saying 8,301 between Hazel and Columbia. But that's not really helpful in terms of understanding the AADTs on the other streets, which are a much more residential streets than the 4-lane section that's listed here. So again, I think it would be really helpful to get a sense of that, and also the percent capacity that is on, like, that those are currently functioning at
Okay.
versus design capacity, and then how that's gonna change. Because I think some consideration, can you give some consideration to restrictive turning movements for some of those entrances and exits onto Hazel Street, so that there might be some reduced traffic volumes onto,
So typically,
right turn.
Typically, turning restrictions come into play if it's a safety consideration, or there is an example would be what we call sight distance. If you can't see a certain distance from the intersection to safely make a turn, that's when a turning restriction might come into play. We didn't see that in this site specifically, so we typically wouldn't recommend that on what we've been working with to date.
Okay. So I'll leave it with you.
Okay.
When you start looking at the AADTs.
Okay.
And it's just, one of the things I wasn't sure I understood in the traffic study is whether you actually have all the pedestrian counts included.
So we did analyze, through the chair, excuse me, we did analyze pedestrian movements at the signalized intersections and across the driveways. So those are included in the operational analyses.
Okay.
And then they're in the appendix material. I know there's a lot of documentation back there, but we did, as part of our counts, we looked at vehicles, trucks, general passenger vehicles, cyclists, pedestrians on each leg of an intersection, and then assumed if a pedestrian is traversing a certain leg, that they would continue in that direction, say across the frontage of the site on Albert and Hazel. And so those impacts are assumed in our analysis.
So one of the things I wondered about is how does, from a traffic perspective, how do you account for things like recognizing you are asking for a reduced parking ratio? How do you account for other transportation modes other than transit, meaning Uber? So for example, One Columbia, there's enormous challenges with regard to other, like deliveries, Uber, all that stuff, blocking the intersection at Columbia and King.
So with respect to the parking, our analysis looks more at the comprehensive supply on the site. And is that supply expected to meet what we think the demand will be? Trips such as an Uber or something like that would be in our trip generation, as we call it. So those would be trips that we see coming into and out of the site. And then those would be included in I think it was the section 4 of our report, where we estimate the site is going to generate so many trips, say in the PM peak hour. And a subset of those would include trips by, say, an Uber or a similar use.
Okay. So more broadly, do we account for those trips in our site design and where they're going to stop other than on the street or on the sidewalk?
Great question. That was exactly what I was going to get to. So you read my mind. So a couple things here. One, kind of by desire of trying to break the site up more, that we're proposing some different blocks that'll host these buildings, and that's why you have these different driveways. So kind of firstly, you have multiple driveway connections so that there are different points of kind of pick up and drop off of Albert and Hazel Street. Internally though, I think the Woonurf design lends itself very well to pickups and drop-offs because it's a slower speed street that's supposed to be shared traffic. So the idea is that you'll have opportunities for small pickup drop-off areas in front of each of the buildings along the Woonurf. And because that's a slower street, it's a shared street, it's much easier for traffic to navigate around, maybe the parked Uber that's temporarily there in front of the building. So yes, we're very mindful from an urban design perspective that is the reality these days, is that there are going to be Ubers, there are going to be Lyfts, there are going to be Uber Eats. So we're trying to find creative ways to accommodate that without sacrificing urban design best practices and without having to do kind of a bunch of surface parking to accommodate that. So we're really trying to integrate that into the broader urban design framework here.
In the development, are you also building EV charging stations? Not EV ready, but actual stations?
We haven't gotten to that stage of the design as of yet. Obviously, the zoning bylaw speaks to kind of EV ready or parking requirements, but I think that was part of the energy strategy in terms of different options that are being considered. So I think, as I was mentioning to Mayor McCabe, when we come back with our resubmission, we'll provide some additional details on these sustainability aspects.
And on the transportation design management piece, the TDM, are you also looking at car share spaces as part of your consideration? Like, would there be a community car share as part of this development?
That's not something that's specifically proposed this time, but the applicant has done that in other development proposals and projects in the past. So certainly that's something that if I think, especially in consultation with staff, they think it is a kind of a useful add-on or contribution to what's proposed here, then certainly something that we'll consider. We find, well, I don't know, Andrew probably would have some more experience than I do here, but from a kind of a planning side, I find that in speaking with some of our different clients, that it's sometimes the pickup and usage of those spaces is kind of haphazard, and it's maybe no rhyme or reason as to when it works and when it doesn't, but certainly something we're willing to consider if that's something that staff suggests is a good supplement to what's already proposed from a TDM perspective.
And also on the transportation demand management piece, what does the Class A bike space look like? Is it an internal lock space? Is it locked spaces in people's units? The last thing I want to know in 20 years' time is that bikes aren't permitted on the internal elevator system. Like, that is it's non-starter. So how are we managing this?
Right, so principally through secured bicycle parking rooms, and one of the zoning amendments that we're looking for is to allow utilization of stacked bicycle parking, which allows for a much more efficient, obviously, storage of bicycle parking, depending on kind of the size and layout of the space itself. In some cases, the vertical parking is more efficient. So we're looking at secured, principally secured bicycle parking rooms, in addition to temporary parking spaces allocated outside throughout the space, kind of especially in proximity to commercial spaces and things like that. We're still working out some of the details of the floor planning and the interior building design, but certainly we're looking to make those spaces as accessible as possible, especially because we're going to be looking at large concentrations of them. So trying to get them as close to the ground as possible, and so certainly something we're taking into consideration and really fill out those details as this application advances, and especially at the site plan stage.
So recognizing that a lot more people are cycling year-round, and that you're looking to be a transit-orientated development, could you possibly give some consideration to those public bike parking spaces being sheltered from snow and that they're not covered in snow? Because that we're busy clearing transit ways and multi-use trails. But if people don't have a cleared place to safely store their bike when they visit these commercial places, it really defeats all the extra work that we're doing at clearing those spaces. So if you could give consideration to that in your design, I think that would be valued.
That's a great point. In addition, I think there's some kind of synergies there in terms of wind mitigation, weather protection. So we aren't all there yet in terms of the full design. It's obviously a very comprehensive development. There's a lot of work that still needs to go into it, but I think there will certainly be opportunities to look at weatherproofing as many as possible of those public spaces so that they're year-round functional, as you suggested.
Okay, was there any other questions, council? All right, thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll be receiving delegations now from the broader citizenry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're now moving on to delegations, and our first delegation is Ms. Fletcher. Judith, you'll have 10 minutes, and if you could just confirm where you live in the region, that'd be great.
Yep,
just your
for sure.
municipality.
Before I start, I just want to see if there's a cursor that I can use. Okay, there is. Okay. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I represent the interests of my community. I've had a lot of conversations with my neighbors. My name is Judith Fletcher, and my husband and I live on Wildwood Place, 100 meters from the proposed 30-story tower, which I have nightmares about. Our property, like that of about 100 households, is adjacent to the Sugar Bush, which is a small forested community of about 25 acres. It's part of the green corridor that stretches across northern Waterloo. Now, I have to say that I do support intensification in Waterloo. I recognize the environmental benefits associated with densification, but our neighborhood seems to be singled out to shoulder the burden of intensification with 3 proposed projects. All in close proximity. So all 3 aim for high-density residential, the Inn of Waterloo, the Quiet Place development, and now the Clemmer site. So I object to rezoning the site to high-density mixed use, and I'm here to advocate for a rezoning to medium-density mixed use. And my reasons are that the neighborhood is low-density medium residential, that the Clemmer site is within 100 meters of the Sugar Bush. The increased traffic will contribute to 2 dangerous corners that endanger cyclists, pedestrians, and children. And I don't think that or my neighbors don't think either, that there's enough parking and that the parking overflow is going to spill onto adjacent streets and parking lots. So as this map demonstrates, the site around the area around the site is low density to medium density. And can I okay. This is where I live, right here on this street. And so let me say that ours is as one of the councilors has already mentioned, ours is a lovely and unique neighborhood. It includes college and university faculty and staff, students, tech workers, other professionals, small business owners, retired people, and young families. There are 10 school-aged children on my street alone. The zoning map, I don't think, really adequately represents the canopy of tall growth maple trees that are on private property. The sugar bush extends to both sides of a wildwood, so we all have, sorry, I am not a master of this, okay. So we've got really trees along here, and then along wildwood as well. And it's really a treasure, I think. It's really something that has to be preserved as much as possible. There's real collective anxiety in the neighborhood about the diminishment of the sugar bush. I've lived in this area for 12 years, and my husband and I have really noticed that the bush is thinning out. Last summer, over 100 residents of the area petitioned against the severance of a property on Hazel Street that would destroy half a dozen tall maple trees that are part of the sugar bush, so it's already under assault. So, of course, I'd love to see the Clemmer site developed, but developed in a way that complements the existing neighborhood with medium density. 5,000 people is too many. 2 30-story towers, one of which is going to cast a shadow on our properties and on the forest for at least part of the day. The official plan, as I understand it, emphasizes an urban form that supports efforts to manage the impact of our community on the natural environment. So I worry about the effects of this development on sugar bush, shadow and wind patterns, reflected solar radiation, urban heat island effect, the effect on groundwater. As I said, it's pretty obvious that the sugar bush is being reduced in size, and this is, I think, 5,000 more people using it is definitely going to degrade it further. The park is not only the habitat of tall maple trees, beech trees, various forms of undergrowth such as trilliums, which are gorgeous in the spring. It's got red squirrels, chipmunks, foxes, possums, and the occasional deer. And this is a fawn that showed up on our front lawn a few years ago, much to the delight of the neighborhood children. This is one of the trails in the park. I'm sure you understand how important these green spaces are for mitigating the effects of climate change, like that week last summer, and we're going to have more of those, I'm sure. So we need to preserve these forested areas. They help to cool and to filter the air. Here's the map again. I'm a cyclist, and for me, that intersection, I think one of the councilors mentioned this already, that intersection at Albert and Hazel is terrifying. I know there have been bike lanes put in. They have calmed the traffic somewhat. There are fewer collisions now, but it's still a precarious crossing. The impact of thousands more car owners in this proposed development is going to make a dangerous corner even worse. Now, this sharp bend where Hazel turns here, okay, so that's 200 meters from the intersection that I just mentioned to you, then is this sharp bend that has been the site of collisions or accidents of over 30 cars and 1 bus in the past 4 years who've missed the turn, who've miscalculated the turn and have ended up on the front lawn of the neighbors at 2 Wildwood Place. So we have sites like this, like this, like this, and like this, and as you can see, this is where the proposed, or one of the proposed new lanes is supposed to be. And I should just say that severed property that I mentioned a moment ago is just kitty corner to this. So that's going to be, it's being advertised as the site of a triplex. So that's going to add more to the confusion, I would think. Regarding parking, where is the overflow going to land? I'm sure there will be overflow. Is it going to be on our street? Local business owners are concerned. I've spoken to some who've got a petition going objecting to the prospect of their parking lots being overrun with the potential overflow. So our city plan, our official city plan, city form, really, I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, emphasizes context-sensitive intensification, desires a plan for neighborhood that supports efforts to manage the impact of our community on the natural environment, which as I really don't think this is going to be good for those little squirrels, et cetera, in the park. And I also know that the official plan, as I understand it, designates areas A and B as in the transit area as potential candidates for intensification. But this is the Clemmer site, and it's not in that area. So I'm concerned that the city is not going to adhere to the objectives that you've already stated in your plan. So really all I am asking for here is that council align its decision on the rezoning application with the terms of the city plan, to think about the effect of those two other developments that are going, that are going to have increased traffic inevitably down Blythewood Street, for example. Blythewood is going to become much busier than it already is. And I'm just very concerned about the effects of this on our beautiful neighborhood and our beautiful park. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. We really appreciate you taking the time to come out this evening and provide your comments to council. It's really valued. Was there questions for Ms. Fletcher?
Through you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming out and sharing your experience and that of your neighbors. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the neighborhood, the student population, walking to school, school bus,
Sure.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, the public school children? Yes, sure. I guess I can show you this on the map. The public school there's public school children who walk from the affordable housing, the townhouses that are down Hazel Street. So there's quite a number of them, and you can see them in the morning going there. So there's definitely a population of students who pass by that on the way to school. So yeah.
And I'm not sure, Judith, if you could speak to any of the concerns of getting to the school bus stop safely, which is further up at Albert and Behringer. And I know I'm just going on your conversations with your neighbors and if there's been any expression of concern.
Right. Crossing anywhere there is really scary sometimes. Drivers ignore the fact that you have a walk sign. So I think it's already a precarious. I mean, the other day I was trying to cross Albert Street, and a car just drove right in front of me. I mean, it's a scary street, and I know that parents take their kids to school. I know there's a real. I'm not sure where the bus stop is though that you're talking about. Could you say the intersection again?
I was speaking to the school board, and they said that there was the student for St. Agnes.
Okay.
Is at Behringer and Albert.
At Behringer and Albert, yeah. Well, Behringer and Albert has been the site of several car crashes that I've witnessed, and so that is a particularly precarious corner at the best of times. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Any other questions for the delegation, council? Seeing none, thank you very much. We're on to our next delegation. It's Miss Parsons, Elizabeth Parsons. Welcome, Elizabeth. If you could just state your residence, your municipality of residence, and then you will have 10 minutes to speak. Thank you. And if you can just get close to the microphone, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
It pulls down if you'd like to move it closer to yourself. Yep,
Thank you.
yep, thank you.
So, thank you to everybody that's attending here for listening to us. I live at 365 Hazel Street, which is at the intersection, basically, of Columbia and Hazel. So I'm not within the 120 meters of the people that got letters, and I really appreciate that Councillor Rowe has walked around in our neighborhood and gotten to know some of us, and including people beyond the 120 meters. So I'm just saying I'm one of them. I've lived there for 40 years, and I don't have any problem with students, or I would have moved by now. What I fail to understand is the one-off developments that are occurring now on our side of Columbia, when in fact, when Northdale was put in place in 2012, the north side of Columbia was to be frozen for development for 25 years. Because apparently, partly infrastructure. The cost of placing infrastructure on that side of the street was prohibitive at that time. So what I'm seeing now is people applying for exemptions into a neighborhood that was supposedly frozen. So my question more is not just about the development on 466 Albert and the Quiet Place development, Waterloo Motor Inn, but the overall plan for the city. Where do these one-offs fit in? And I feel like if I took a drone and flew over the top of our neighborhoods, you would be able to see the increasing ill effect of this developmental impact upon the environment, but we can't see it from the ground level. But our green spaces are really disappearing, and I respect that they're putting little trees, decorative little trees, along the Woonarf or wherever. It's not the same as mature trees. The sugar bush goes back to the time of Abraham Erb. That land was given for preservation purposes to the city. So it's about a big picture. I want the council to think about the big picture. I lost a tree to the derecho, and it was more than 60 years old. And if you walk down Hazel Street, you can see that the trees are suffering. Somebody from the forestry department, when I asked, is this climate change or pollution? The reply was, I'm afraid it's pollution. Columbia Street went from 2 lanes to 4, 5 at my corner, right? There's a lot of impact that's taking place that people aren't accounting for. And I would like to ask, has there been environmental impact studies done on 3 of these developments taking place simultaneously and what that's going to do to our area? That's beyond the traffic issues, which I can also address. How many times I've been rear-ended coming out of my driveway, not my fault. And it's insane now because the bike lanes have caused people to avoid Albert and cut through Hazel. So I think, again, this is an example of planning that is not taking into account the big picture. So I'm not sure if this meeting is just about this development, but I'm raising an issue that I'm sure you're all aware of. We need to look at the big picture and not just one-offs. And the one-offs that are taking place should put mature trees in, not little skinny things that do nothing to mitigate climate change. Put some nice big mature trees in there. Maybe a little more expensive, but that's, that's okay. They help us. So I appreciate that people are trying to help by asking the right questions. I think the traffic, you need to look at High Street and Columbia when you're looking at Hazel, because people come around Columbia, come around High, and you're caught in the middle. That's now, before these developments. So you can't just restrict your traffic to that little corner. Come on to my house. Sit in my house in the morning and sit in my house when school is out. Cars parked all along, kids crossing. It's not okay to just count cars at one corner. Sorry for the rant. I'm trying not to be totally ranty, but you can tell I'm attached to my neighborhood, and I do feel there'd be other people here too, if it wasn't for the fact that they didn't know this was taking place. Similarly with the open house, yes, it was a great opportunity, but there was really no presentation, so you were left wandering. You could ask questions. I went to the open house for the Waterloo Development Motor Inn. It was a totally different style. You were educated at that open house. So I feel there's a little more educating that needs to go on about this development. I feel a second open house might be appropriate to address things like, why is 90% of it going to be one bedroom? Why is that okay? We need more student housing. Where are all the other families to live? I have people trying to live in student housing beside me because they can't find anywhere else to live. You got to look at this development and ask yourself, who's going to live there? The operative word is live. We all need to be able to live and breathe. And I ask you to please step back and figure out how you're going to help us do that. I'm not sure what the answers are. I understand the pressures of creating housing. But one-bedroom housing, 70% of our development in the last few years has been investor-driven. It's not a question of building housing for people that need housing. It's a question of continuing to build investor-driven housing. It's not okay. Okay, that's it. Sorry.
No apologies required. We appreciate that you're here tonight and asking us to give consideration to a bigger picture. That's awesome. Thank you. Do you mind if council asks you a few questions? Yeah. Thank you. Did you have a question, Councillor Rowe?
Through you, Chair. I don't have a question because I think you expressed yourself really well. And I just wanted to thank you for your advocacy for your neighborhood. Like you said, I've been there, I've listened, and it's important for council and for the applicant to hear your experience. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a few questions for staff based on the last couple of presentations, if I could. So one of the questions I had around the traffic study again is how the forecasting was determined and whether it included all of the potential development within the broader community. So I guess I don't know how the region determines that, whether they look at zoning or whether they would give account to our transit station area potential growth forecasts. I wasn't sure, but can you advise, like, if all of that extra traffic has been given consideration to?
So thank you through the chair. I have reviewed the traffic impact study. I don't remember off the top of my head if it included all those other developments. I will definitely confirm that for you as well. And I apologize, I'm blanking on the rest of that question.
Sorry?
I'm blanking on the rest of the question.
No, that was mainly it. Like, it was both what's in the hopper, what people have applied for, and the other is what we're planning for based on OP and densities. Because we do have the station transit area study that's in here too. So that was my one question. The second question I forgot to ask earlier, is the development proposed to be apartments or condominiums?
Thank you to the chair. So right now, we only have applications of an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment. They are still figuring out the tenure of the applications.
The other question is there an opportunity for a second open house?
Thank you through the chair. I think I would need to have those discussions with the applicant. I see them nodding their head yes, but I will confirm that again. And if there is a second open house, it would be available on the Engage page, which is set up for this applicant, and we'd also send out notices as well.
And I guess maybe you can help remind me of, there was a comment made about environmental assessment and more broadly, like within neighborhood or block planning. And maybe you could better unpack how we account for things like that.
So thank you through the chair. So there is the opportunity in like a higher sense that we can request environmental impact studies if they're immediately adjacent to like a significant environmental feature, or if there's near like water, for example. Based on my recollection, I do not believe through the pre-con application that an environmental impact study was requested for this. That being said, they did submit an energy impact study, which does take that into consideration. Same with the wind, same with the shadow. They speak to urban design briefs, also take some of the environmental impact into consideration as well. So it's kind of all those smaller pieces that create the bigger piece of the pie, I suppose.
So it seems like there's a lot of interest in better understanding the potential impact to Sugarbush Park. So is it possible to request an EIS or a scoped EIS for Sugarbush Park?
Through the chair, certainly we can evaluate that with staff in-house, but we may also require the applicant to provide some supporting information to assist in that review. But we've certainly heard this evening that there are concerns with respect to the protection of Sugarbush Park as an environmental feature and the potential for increased population use of that space and what it might result in the long-term impacts or potential impacts for the forest and woodlands. So we'll take it back and we'll further consult with the applicant.
Thank you. So I was going to ask for other delegations, council, unless anyone else had questions of staff based on these two, Mayor?
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair Freeman. Just a couple questions. Can you just quickly remind me what the breakdown of the units, like 1, 2, 3 bedrooms are?
Through the chair, I apologize. I don't actually have that information at my fingers, but I can send you a follow-up
Can you just
information. I'm not sure if Brandon potentially might have it.
Let me just flip to the right page here.
I think our clerks has it on the screen for you, Brandon.
Oh, yes, that's it right there on the screen. I'll note that the percentage breakdown is based on the unit total. Based on bedroom total, though, it's approximately 18% of the units, or of the bedrooms, sorry, are in the 2 and 3 bedroom units. The remainder being in the 1 bedroom units.
Okay. Sorry, you're saying 18% is?
Of the bedrooms. The percentage there is based on the unit total. So it depends how you break it down. The city typically uses bedrooms per hectare as a density indicator. So if you look at it on a bedroom perspective, it's about 18% of the bedrooms are in 2 and 3 bedroom units, and it's about 10% of the units.
Okay, thank you. And my other question, and it's not specific about this proposal. at all is just listening to the delegates and listening to some of the conversation around here about the traffic in this area. Is this an area, I know we've proposed, or we decided to reduce speed limits in various areas, but is there traffic calming or something that needs to be addressed? Has this area been looked at? Because, again, just hearing Councillor Wright's comments, Councillor Rowe's comments, the delegates' comments, and the pictures about the accidents and things that have happened there, I mean, is this an area that needs to be looked at for some traffic calming?
Mr. Henderson?
Thank you, through you, Chair Freeman, to Mayor McCabe. We do have a report coming to council soon on the speed management plan that assess the impacts of the speed limit reductions taking place. As far as traffic calming initiatives, we could take that back for consideration and review if there's any necessary need to consider that.
Thank you. I'm sure there's like lots of neighborhoods across Waterloo, like traffic speeds are one of the highest complaints that we get consistently, so I'm sure there's a list, but just again, listening to what people were saying here and tonight about that neighborhood, it certainly sounds like it could warrant some attention. Thank you.
Selective traffic enforcement was busy on Regina Street today. So your 40-kilometer zones, Julie, were well patrolled today. Now I'd just like any registered delegations that would like to speak to this application to please come forward, and you'll have 5 minutes. Yep, please come forward. If you could just please state your name and your municipality of residence.
Thank you very much. My name is Dev Handa. I'm a resident of Waterloo. I live on Parkwood Court, 472 Parkwood Court. On the surface of it, there's a lot of merit to the approach that the applicant has taken in terms of some of the urban design and some of the considerations. However, there's some troublesome things. For instance, the 31-story marquee building is placed at the northeast corner of the site, and in your presentation it was so as to make sure that the public space on your site is not cast into shadow. But by doing that, you're throwing the tallest building into the worst possible corner of the site that's going to cast a shadow right into Wildwood and into the into Sugarbush. So do we concern ourselves with making it, you know, as good as possible for within the site at the expense of the neighborhood? Kind of, that's what it looks like. When the existing height is 40 meters, and we move right to, you know, in addition to changing the nature of the zoning, we're going to the highest density and then asking for another, it's, I think, if I understood correctly, another 30 units per hectare, or 30 bedrooms per hectare. We're going from 40 meters in the official plan, I gather, to 100. I just don't like, where does the rationale for that come from? Is it, I mean, the only one I can think of is profit maximization. That doesn't seem to be in balance. To go that big a step, it just, where's the middle? You know, I think you talk about there being sort of medium density and having a staged approach, and I understand what you're saying, going from the 3 stories on Hazel to the 9 stories, 14 stories, then to the 31-story. But what's wrong with going from 3 to 5 to 11? Where do these numbers come from? Why do we have to shoot for the moon? It just seems like all the proposals that our neighborhood is facing, and I guess I counted 3, but I think are there 4, because there's the Conestoga College lands, there's the Drewlow proposal. I always forget Quiet Place, so I don't really even know that one. Clemmer and Quiet Place. Each unto its own might be okay. I think they're all too big. They're all too much, and they're not really taking into account the greater context of all of them happening. Blythewood is death waiting to happen. When we don't have the officers patrolling it, people make the illegal left turn from Weber onto Blythewood, and they bomb up that street. And I've jumped in front of cars, and gone like this because I'm so frustrated that they're doing that through a children's crossing. Maybe I'm going to be the one that gets killed. I don't know, but somebody is going to get killed on that street. And it's an accident of planning, an ancient accident. When Behringer was realigned to meet up to Hazel, it's dumping a lot of all the sort of movements, you know, that ought to probably be happening on Columbia, but they're coming down, they come down Behringer and they empty into roads that aren't intended to be, I'm not sure, arteries or whatever, but, and so part of it, you know, they go down Hazel, part of it continues down to Columbia, and part of it turns left onto Blythewood, and then runs into a T at Weber Street. And, you know, it's just, like, that's, and this makes it worse. And just another example, when I mentioned about the tower being put into the northeast corner going from 40 to 100, the other example in my mind, when you had the traffic study up, your traffic area was an L-shaped block on Hazel and Albert. How could you not even include the curve at Hazel and then, of course, Blythewood? Like that, it's almost... Is it intentionally zoning it out so that we can pretend that the problem doesn't exist, or is it just a lack of awareness that you didn't really discover what you're dealing with here and realize there's an existing problem? And then that third driveway, which was obscured by the tree in the rendering, and we talked, there was a question about turn restrictions. So cars coming out of there, the ones turning right are going to turn right and almost do a 180 because they're going to, as soon as they turn right there, the bend on Hazel to go south occurs, and the ones turning left can't see around the corner to see what's coming up Hazel and making that curve at the bend. So it's about planning. There's something missing. Like there's a lack of a kind of a holistic, and you spoke to this. It just seems like, you know, if one of these proposals, or maybe we take the cumulative total of these 4 proposals and then divide each one by 4 and allocate so that no one proposal is being elevated above the others, but we take that cumulative amount of units that they're asking for and say, well, this is just, I don't know, how many, what is it, 12,000, 10,000? Like, it's too much. It's just too much. Any of these proposals, they all have some merit to them, and I also am in favor of intensification, but it's too much, and I think our neighborhood, for whatever reason, seems to be bearing a far greater share of the expected, anticipated additional housing that everyone expects Waterloo to have. It's too much clustered here, and I wonder, we're kind of a mixed neighborhood.
You're over time.
Okay,
so if
thank
you
you.
could just wrap.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wrapped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Ashwin?
Good evening, Council. My name is Ashwin Annamalai. I'm a resident of the city of Waterloo. Happy New Year, everyone. Some great news coming from the city. $2.2 million have been approved for the Housing Accelerator Fund. I was very happy to see the picture of Council with the Prime Minister, especially when the Prime Minister had his arm around Councillor Royce Bodley. It was really heartening to see that particular picture. So it was Councillor Royce Bodley's motion, the 4-plex and 4 stories motion, that helped us get here. So thank you, Councillor Bodley. So if you ever consider a career in professional wrestling, please do consider the stage name the 4-plex. Your nemesis can be called the NIMBY, and your signature move can be called gentle density. So I know Council is very happy about getting the 2.2 million, but there's something that Council should be even happier about. The CMHC rental vacancy report just came out, and the first thing that I saw was Canada's rental vacancy rate was at 1.4%, such a historic low. I was like, oh no, now I'm going to look at Waterloo, and it's going to be at 0.6, 0.7%, and it's going to be all doom and gloom. But when I scroll down to the Waterloo page, it was at 2.1%, so all the work that staff and council are doing, it's having a positive impact on our community, and I'm really grateful and thankful for all of that, because last year we complained that the rental vacancy rate is 1.2%, 1.2%. It's only fair if we come today and acknowledge that things are moving in the positive direction. Our rental vacancy rate has improved by 60, 70%. So hats off to you. Coming to this particular proposal, There are so many good things in this proposal. We need housing. We are in the middle of a housing crisis. Students are being subject to overcrowded conditions. There's like 3-4 people living in one bedroom. It's already here in our city. And the only way we are coming out of this is by embracing more housing. And this is not just housing, but it's mixed density housing, where there's going to be businesses, offices, green space, a WUNERF. So I'm for this proposal, and we need more of these. So thank you for that. And I looked at the parking proposal. I hope council also paid attention. There's parking, and then there's housing on top. Maybe council should take a cue from this and decide to start building on parking lots that are owned by the city. The sky will not fall if we do that. So that's another positive thing that I see in this proposal. It is close to transit, it is close to bikeways, and it's also close to the Sugar Brush Park, and so many people will be able to access the park. It's not like we are cutting down the entire park. The park is still going to stay there. So we let more people access the park. So that is another great positive that comes from this particular development. Now, let's go to the complaints. Sorry, I should not have said complaints. Let's look at the areas of improvements here. Like so many of my neighbors said, I would love to see more 2-bedroom units here. We are in the middle of a housing crisis, and us beggars cannot be choosers here, but it would be really nice if staff could liaise with the developers. And this is an informal public input meeting. There is still more time until we get to the formal meeting. So we need more 2- and 3-bedroom units. This is a self-serving interest. Shiva and I would love to have a kid or adopt a kid. We just have a 1-bedroom unit. So if there are more 2- or 3-bedroom options, it would help us a lot. And the second area of improvement would be, we've seen time from public consultation to the informal meeting to the formal meeting take up to 1 year. Please do not take 1 year. Please make it in 60 days or faster. And the third thing is, I came across an article from the UW imprint. I have also emailed council about this particular article. I'm just going to read a few excerpts from the article. UW imprint is the official University of Waterloo's newspaper. So it says, accommodative data leak shows awful conditions. How many unresolved maintenance requests make you a slumlord? And this article goes on about mold, cockroaches, inadequate property standards, and so forth. So, and it also says that Prica Global Enterprise is owned by Accommodative. I don't know if this particular development is related to Prica Global Enterprises in any way, but the city is responsible for property standards, and the city must do a better job to protect our students from exploitative housing conditions. It's not the Residential Tenancies Act, it is the city, and its property standards have to be upheld. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. Is there anyone else present tonight who would like to speak to this application? Sorry, any questions for Ashwin? Mayor?
Just a quick comment. Thanks, Ashwin, for coming in. It's 22 million, not 2.2.
Oh, my bad, Mayor.
I just wanted to correct
Apologies for that, 22, my bad, huge rounding mistake.
Yeah, that's a decimal place.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Trudeau would count that. So, thank you. I don't think there's any more questions. Thank you, Ashwin.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present tonight who would like to speak to this application? Yes, please come forward. If you can state your name and municipality of residence, please.
Good evening, Council. My name is Shiva Subramanian, and I am a resident of the city of Waterloo. Ashwin said his piece, so I also have to say my piece. I think we talked a little bit about the big picture today, and when we talk about big picture, I think we have to zoom out of neighborhoods and look at what's happening across the region, across the country, across the world. I think I specifically want to talk about what's happening to the younger generation as well. We have to face like the harsh reality and the harsh truth. Our dreams of home ownership is pretty much dead. I'm not going to be able to afford like $1 million home in the middle of the city, we are getting there with Waterloo. I think like Toronto is like 2 million now. I think Waterloo is like 700K, 800K if I want like a home in a good neighborhood. So home ownership is pretty much dead. I don't think like I'm ever going to have a backyard, front yard, like a place for my children to play in. I'm not going to have deer visiting my neighborhood. That's never going to happen for me. All I can hope to afford is like maybe one day I'll have like an apartment in the sky, but an apartment that's big enough to like raise my family. That's one thing that I do want to highlight to the developers about. This thing just started. Maybe it will be completed in a decade. If everything goes well, maybe in 2 decades it would be done. By the time that happens, we're not going to be talking about single-family homes here. We need 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartments. We do not, 1-bedroom apartments are not enough. We need like bigger apartments. So I kindly request the developers to consider that. It's like very disheartening to see like 2,000 1-bedroom apartments and then like one like whole factor down 200 2-bedrooms and barely any 3-bedroom apartments. So we need to think about the future. We need to think about the big picture. Zooming out of the neighborhood, if we do not intensify inside the city, we will lose like precious farmland and like green space that's outside of the city, and we'll be like suffering for food. We will lose like a lot more delicate ecosystems. So that's what I want to say. And I want to say today I rent at the Barrel Yards, which is, I would say, a similar sized apartments. We are at like, 6 towers of like 22 floors, and we have more towers coming. We cast shadows everywhere, like be it on like the rec center, on Silver Lake, on Waterloo Park, on the neighborhoods behind, but that is what it takes if we want to live in a sustainable way. We have to like compromise in certain areas so that like we can leave a better planet, a better life for the generations ahead. We cannot be selfish. We cannot be like, I want my front yard and I want my backyard and I want like this little green space that's there. Sugar Bush is lovely. I think I've been there. It's a fantastic green space in the middle of the city. We should be doing what we can to protect the space, but we should not like sacrifice generations, future generations to just protect a small parcel of land within the city. We need to think of the bigger picture and look at what happens if we do not intensify today. Barrel Yards, I think, I'm not sure, maybe Councillor Freeman knows, it came to the council in 2008 and they are still building. It's not done, like they're 2 decades in and they're still building. They can still accommodate a lot more people. So this is a very long time frame that we are looking at. We cannot make decisions based on what's happening today. We need to think about the future. So that's what I have to say. There's a lot of things that can be done. I just want to say that I'm supportive of this proposal, and I hope to see a revised proposal where we have like more 2- and 3-bedroom units. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Thanks for reminding me how long I've been sitting in the seat. Yes. Indeed, Barrel Yards was approved in our first term of council. But
I love it, like whenever I come to the city or I go to the region, all the wallpapers are just of the Barrel Yards, and I find it like really funny that whenever such kind of developments come, there's always like a lot of opposition, but whenever, from the city's perspective, that seems to be like something that they want to show off.
yeah, thank you. There's a lot of truth to recognize that there's a lot of parts of the city that have intensified in growth over time, and at the time the intensification was happening, it felt very impactful. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I just want to point out that Mr. Cotter's been around longer than me. And Mr. Armson, too. I won't start in on Tim. Is there anyone else present today who would like to speak to this application? Can you please come forward and state your name and municipality of reference for the record? Welcome.
Hello, my name is Craig Sloss. I'm a resident of Waterloo. I live on 181 King Street. south. Sorry, I always get them mixed up. The one that's just over there. All right, so I'm going to apologize. This isn't very polished because I wasn't planning on talking today. I actually came here because it's budget season. I was interested in the budget portion of the meeting, but this interests me now too. And I want to talk about why I view this as a budget decision, not a decision about this year's budget, but decisions that are going to impact future budgets. And I would urge you to consider this along with all the other feedback that you've heard today. So, this afternoon, you were reviewing the capital budget, and one of the projects that stuck out to me was converting Beaver Creek Road and Conservation Drive from rural roads to urban roads to support development in that area. The total cost of this project is $78 million. Now, most of that's being funded by development charges. I know there's still uncertainty as to the regulations and whether we'll actually get that money or not, but regardless, taxpayers are still paying for $1.6 million for the roads in that area. And even if it's development charges, even if they don't get reflected in the tax bill, those still get paid by someone. I'm assuming development charges get passed on in the form of cost of the housing in the area. And that's being done to support 2,300 units in the area. This proposal is getting us 2,800 units. And it's in an area where we already have roads, we already have trails, and it's right next to an LRT stop. So I can't imagine us needing to spend 8 figures from our capital budget to support a building like this. So I want you to consider, imagine if we're not building in the areas that are already serviced. What would happen if we tried to put these 2,800 people on areas of the city, on the edges of the city where we don't have infrastructure already built up, and imagine how much that's going to cost us in the future and how much pressure that is going to put on taxpayers. And I know you're already hearing a lot from taxpayers who are struggling with the current level of taxes that they are paying. I think we need to realize that approving something like this is the fiscally responsible decision here because it's going to reduce the long-term costs to the taxpayer. And it's also going to free up funds that can be used potentially for other services as well, right? I kind of view this as an opportunity to have a lot more taxpayers in the area who aren't requiring a lot of new additional services to be built because we already have a lot of services built up in that area. One thing I'd like to commend council for as well is the decision you made last November to uphold the countryside line, which I view as a highly responsible decision from a fiscal perspective because it's going to do a lot to reduce the pressures in the future that are going to result from, hypothetically, if we were to build in rural areas, right? It's easy to imagine a situation where Waterloo didn't uphold the countryside line, and the reason I say it's easy to imagine is because a lot of other local municipalities have not kept up their side of the bargain in terms of protecting the countryside line, and they are not behaving in a fiscally responsible manner because it's going to be expensive to service areas outside that line. So I just want you to consider what the long-term budgetary impact of if we don't build here, where are we going to build it, and how much is that going to cost? So thank you for taking the time to listen to my feedback.
Thank you very much, Craig. Was there any questions for Craig? Certainly appreciate your observations at this budget time. Thank you. Again, I'll ask, is there anyone else present tonight who would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, are there any further questions, council, to staff? Okay. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. And I'll just remind you again, if you're here about this application, please ensure that you've signed the registry at the back of the room if you'd like more information. Okay, council. Consideration of notice of motion given at a previous meeting, there's none. Notice of motion, there's none. Communications and correspondence, there's none. Unfinished business, none. Questions, council? Seeing none. New business? Mayor McCabe?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Excuse me, pardon me. I just wanted to make a quick statement regarding the Housing Accelerator announcement that happened on Friday. And just, I know I had sent an email to council and staff, and we were aware that that was happening on Friday, but I just wanted to, again, make a statement in council to, again, thank the Prime Minister and the federal government and MP Bardish Jagger, who we worked with, to secure this $22 million. And just again to say that we're grateful to be working with the federal government, who sees the benefit in working directly with municipalities and working quickly with us to address this really important issue. So we're really excited about this funding. I really believe it will be a game changer. It is $22 million, and it will address, there's a number of programs and initiatives that it will address, and including it gives us the ability to work with partners like the region of Waterloo and nonprofits and co-ops, and as well as the private sector, to look at opportunities to potentially use our own land, potentially look at employment lands, converting employment lands, and other programs like grant programs to incentivize nonprofits and co-ops to leverage what they own, and also to help homeowners, current homeowners, look at their own properties and see if there's opportunities for them to build more housing units as well. So we certainly are going to put this funding to really good use. But we know that, as Councillor Bodley said, I think at the last Monday, council gets to make these big lofty statements and set lofty goals, but we know that it's staff that we turn to and we rely on to work really, really hard to make these a reality. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to thank particularly the staff who helped. We call them our HAF team, the Housing Accelerator Fund team, who worked really quickly when this fund was announced, who worked really quickly to get this application in because the timelines were really, really tight, and the goal and what we were looking for was $22 million. So it was high stakes as far as I'm concerned. So we just really wanted to thank Michelle Lee, who is really leading this project, Brad Witzel, who's our wizard in the finance department, Tanya Kurek, who's also in planning, Adam Lauder in long-term planning, Joel Cotter, who I think he just left, unfortunately, but Joel, we know, provides great leadership and has a really calm, steady approach to all the barrage of planning applications that have come in, certainly over my time at the city, but we know he has a long history here and provides great leadership to the city of Waterloo. Angela Schneider, Michael Puglisi, Paul Haddinga. Thank you, Paul. He's here tonight. Mallory Amont, who helped with working with Bardish's office and working with the with the federal government to get them to a yes and to set up meetings with Minister Fraser and to manage some of the activities on Friday. And then, of course, our clerk, Julie Finley Smorin, and our Director of Communications, Carrie Van Nykirk, who helped with getting remarks together, helping wordsmith our application, and then pushing that good news out on Friday as well. So, we're really lucky, I think, and I'm really grateful at the city here to have, as I said on Friday, some of the very best staff in the business to work with on projects like this and applications like this. And it was a really big deal to get to yes. This $22 million is going to be a real game changer for the city of Waterloo and for people who are in, as we've heard, great need of additional housing, and we're going to rely on the staff and other staff to move to implementation. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge all the work they did and will continue to do, and thank them on behalf of all of council. So thank you, staff.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe. Any other new business, Council? Councillor Vasek?
Not quite as monumental as that, but another thanks to staff. I was at a Rotary Club meeting last week, and they awarded the 2 folks who have been organizing Wonders of Winter their Paul Harris Fellowship Award. And they highlighted at the end of the meeting how much they appreciated park staff for all the work, the assistance that they give throughout the season, because it's much longer than just the timeline of Wonders for Winter, but there's a lot that goes into setup and takedown. So anyways, thanks to park staff, if you could pass it along. Yeah.
Councillor Ray?
This is clearly a staff appreciation session. On Saturday in Uptown North, there was the unveiling of a new piece of public art, which was supported by the neighborhoods team. So yay, neighborhoods. It's a woven wall, and it was a very interactive art project that drew neighbors together to work with artist Agnes. I'm so sorry, I have to actually put my glasses on to look at her name. Agnes Niewiadomski. And so the launch was Saturday afternoon. It drew people from not just the neighborhood, but those people who were traveling along the Laurel Creek Trail, who pass Brighton Park on a regular part of their navigation of the city if they're coming from Ward 5. And so it's just a reminder that this park is such a vital connection point to especially to the Laurel Creek Master, or the Greenway Master Plan. So yeah, it was just a really fun event. It was all ages, urban, native, transitional housing drummers were there, with the executive director of the KW Urban Native Wigwam Project. The mayor managed to come out. Former Mayor Dave Jaworski was there. It was just a really, really lovely gathering, and so big kudos to our neighborhoods team for helping to foster that spirit.
That's great, thank you. Any other new business? Councillor Rowe?
Yes, through you, Chair. I just mentioned last week that I was going to Waterloo Pentecostal Assembly for their Thursday evening, they call it the feeding frenzy. So I attended on Thursday and helped. I sprinkled cheese on chili, so I'll say I helped, but it was really fantastic. They feed over 300 students a week, and it really was incredible, and the volunteers that come together to support the students, it really was amazing. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them, and just, the community spirit and supporting students at a time when it's, tough to be a student going to school and working and sometimes not having enough to eat, so.
Yeah, thank you. Other new business? I just wanted to say that before we received the funding announcement, I spent an hour with all of the grade 5 students at Lester B talking about local government. And it's always fantastic. And like they were little mind readers, they asked me whether I ever had opportunities to meet people in higher levels of government, like the Prime Minister, they said. And I thought, oh my goodness, I can't even tell you where I'm going next. Yeah, they're excited about our Mayor and Council program for a day. So I just want to put a shout out for that and remind everybody to use their social media channels to get out information about the Mayor and Council for the day. And if you have an opportunity to work with Ileana to go into your public schools within your wards, I encourage you to do it. It's a really awesome time. The announcement at Parkwood was also very meaningful. It's really amazing to recognize just how much our suburbs are becoming urban areas, and that all of the city of Waterloo is really starting to see intensified growth, and I think funding announcements like that happening in what would have traditionally been seen as a suburban area part of the city is a recognition of how the city's changing everywhere, not just, even though a lot of our intensified growth happened in Uptown at the beginning, it's kind of that reminder that we're growing up as a city everywhere, so. And with that, we are on to.
Chair.
Sorry?
Sorry,
Oh,
I had
yeah.
one more. I meant to thank you to Julie, the clerk, for reminding me that I had last week submitted to the provincial government, this on behalf of the city of Waterloo and on council, our pre-budget consultation submission. So it is posted on my website, waterloo.ca, and then go under mayor and council, and you can read. It outlines our 6 main asks of the provincial government, which are right there. Thank you, clerks, for putting that there. And I think one of the main ones is the number 1, a new fiscal funding arrangement for municipalities, because as we've talked about through our own budgeting process, and certainly at the region in December of 2023, there's just continues to be a significant amount of responsibilities downloaded to the municipalities, which we are trying mightily our best to address. But these are things that are getting put on a property tax system that was never ever designed to do such, to fund such initiatives, again, like housing and homelessness, some of the affordable housing, and things that we're addressing right now, some of the social challenges that we're seeing in our cities and beyond. So they're not unique to Waterloo, but certainly they are municipalities across the province and likely across Canada are all calling for this kind of new fiscal funding arrangement. So if anyone's interested in reading it, it's posted on the website, and happy to answer any questions people have about that. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. All right, I think we're on to enactment of bylaws. Council, do I have a mover for those? Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Wright. It's the west side of the city is running things over here. And all in favor? That's carried unanimously. Motion to adjourn, my friends. Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All in favor? Thank you. Get lots of rest. We have a big day next Monday.